Football for me is the most popular sport on earth, which is watched by millions every weekend. It is a sport which can make the world stand still, stop wars, and rock entire nations. It's called the beautiful game, not only by me, but by millions of other people who watch the game and feel a deep connection with it in the teams they support. But it was called the beautiful game by one of the greatest footballers of all time, who is Pele. He called it O Jogo Bonito, which is the beautiful game in Portuguese. Pele subsequently turned 80 yesterday. He is a footballing great because he had a deep love for the sport. He had an emotional connection with the game. He always played by the rules, always respected opponents, always respected the rules of the game. It is said he never played dirty, and he scored a lot of goals, and he was a very good player overall and will go down in history as one of the greatest of all time. During the course of this webinar, I'll be talking about the origins of football. I'll be looking at how it evolved from the old game up till the modern game. And modernization is basically about the different rules which came into be. And finally, I'll be looking at the lessons which we can take from football and apply it in our real life to become better people. To start off it at origin, can anyone have a guess as to where football originated from? Anyone?
Greece.
That's a good guess, sir. But Greece, it was in Greece first in Europe, but football is actually not from Europe. It's not from any of the countries which you would expect it to be from. It's not anywhere in Africa, especially even more surprisingly, it's not from South America. It came into the to South America in the 1860s. So football originally was from China. Football was invented in China and it was very different from the game which we know today. And it wasn't obviously called football. It was called Kuju. It still exists in China today. They play it for ceremonies, usually for old-fashioned marriages, etc. So they used to play this game, and obviously the ball which they used was very different. The ball which they used was rock, but which had been softened by keeping under a waterfall of sorts to brush off the sharp edges. And China was where football was first invented. Then in the 3rd and 2nd century BC. Then from China, football moved a little bit further till Japan. In Japan, again, people used to play with this rock hard ball, which has been softened by water. But the only difference in Japan was it was called kamari, and also this type of football was played mainly during ceremonies. Kamari, however, doesn't exist today as how Cujo exists still in China. So moving on, as Sir had already said, the first nation in Europe which had got to know about football was Greece. So Greek people used to play football not as a leisurely activity. They used to play football in order to maintain peak physical fitness in the military. Spartans, as we know, were the inhabitants of Greece at this point, and they were really physical people. They fought many wars. They used to constantly have a lot of hardships. So this football was in order to maintain peak physical condition. Then from then on, from Greece, this has football had kind of moved to Rome. It did this because, as we know in history, the Greek and the Romans have interchanged a lot of their culture. Their mythologies are a lot similar. All the gods are pretty similar. The names are different, like how Poseidon is called Neptune in Roman history, but they kind of exchanged this. And in Rome, when football arrived in Rome, the whole of Europe got to know about the existence of football. Moving on, football was developed in England in the 12th century. So England is where people really started to notice about football, that football was actually a game which you could play. And developed means that developed doesn't mean the modern game, but development means there were few aspects which were changed. Development, for example, meant that football was to be played on a plain surface, not an uneven surface. It also meant that the existence of goalposts. Obviously, they didn't have goalposts back then. So what they used to do is keep two rocks apart from each other, and the rule was if the ball goes between those two rocks, it's a point or it's a goal. So this was the development. And another point of development was people in China, Japan, and Greece used to play football bare feet. In the 12th century England, people were a little more posh. They didn't want to wear, they didn't want to play barefoot. So they came up with high length boots, especially for football. So that is the development of football in England. Now, football was played in England from the 12th century up till the 14th century, where it was banned in the 14th century. Now, the ban happened because people used to play very rashly back then. There wasn't a certain set of rules to tell that you're not supposed to do this or you are supposed to do this. So people played football very rashly. It caused many injuries. It caused some odd deaths also, because people used to play with a hard leather ball back then compared to the ball which we use today, and there was no protective headgear for anyone. Uh, and yeah, this caused rivalries to occur between people, and people really took out their anger on other people during the course of a game. There was also no rule that it wasn't actually, it was called football, but people used to grab the football with their hands and run. So it was basically like rugby. It was a very rash game, and this caused football to be banned from 14th century up till the 17th century, specifically from the year 1314 up till the year 1667. This was done, as I said, because of the brutality. Uh, Football was bought back in the year 1667 because people had read about the history of football and they felt a connection to the game, that it's a very entertaining game. So the officials in Britain brought back the game, and yeah, it was played for quite some time before being banned again in 1835, because it was the same story again. They didn't have a garnered set of rules, so people used to do whatever they wanted. They used to run with the ball, they used to kick opponents. This ban, however, the ban of 1835 didn't last very long, and football was allowed again in the 1850s, because at that point people really in 1835 people by 1835 people had a connection with the game. They had it was a way of life basically, and being banned, even the officials couldn't allow the game to be banned for a long time. So it was allowed to for playing again in the 1850s. This is the origin of football. Moving on, I'll talk about the evolution of the game, how it went from this rash sport, which I told you about, to somewhat of a gentler game. So the modern football which we know of, the football which we see today, all the sets of rules, everything came up in England in the 1950s. 1950s because it obviously was allowed to play in the 1850s, but it took another 100 years to get all the sets of rules correct. It was took another 100 years for the competitions to exist. It took another 100 years for teams to be formed, good, proper, solid teams to be formed. And there were a lot of rules, new rules, like there was the offside rule, handball rule, all that. That was given by the 1950s. So the game which we know today hasn't really changed much for the last 70 years. Football in its earliest form was played like rugby. As I told before, football was played like rugby because there wasn't any rule. In rugby, you can play as rashly, you can tackle opponents. You don't get any fouls for that, but in football in its earliest form, yeah, football was played exactly like rugby, and so the officials had a hard time thinking what rules to put to govern this game. So because they had to make it different from rugby. The single most important event in the history of football is the formation of FA, or the Footballing Association, in England in 1862. Now, why is it so important? Because FA laid down the rules during their meeting of 1862. During the formation meeting, they laid down all the rules which were needed to play the game of football. They had mentioned that the pitches should be completely even. They had decided the size of the ball, what is the length of the pitch, what is the weight of the ball, how much it should weigh. Because if it weighed more, it might cause injuries during the course of the game. So that is the formation of FA. This is the symbol of the FA. As you can see, there are three lions in the symbol. This is also the logo of England whenever they represent their country in international stage, and that's why we call England the three lions at any international competition. 1855 Sheffield. This is a pretty important date in football because in Sheffield, the first ever club was formed. This club was formed not by professionals, it was formed by workers in the city and college students who banded together for their love of their game and wanted to play football against other opposition. So the first club ever formed was Club of Sheffield, 1855, which doesn't exist today, but we have two other Sheffield clubs which exist. First of which is shown there, that is Sheffield Wednesday. Sheffield Wednesday is a club which plays in the second tier of English football, which is called the Championship. There is another team which is Sheffield United, which plays in the Premier League, which is the top tier of English football. Sheffield Wednesday, with love, we call them the Owls because of their logo. And Sheffield United, we call them the Blades, again, because of their logo. Moving on, Notts County, 1862. Notts County is the oldest professional footballing club which still exists to this day. That's the logo. Notts County still exists today, but the sad truth is, even though they are the oldest, and in the 1860s and 70s were one of the biggest clubs in England, the sad truth is that Notts County have kind of fallen off the map of football and currently play in the ninth tier of English football, which means no one really sees them anymore. Lausanne 1960. Lausanne was formed in 1960 in Switzerland. It was the first club to be formed outside of England, but certainly not the last. Buenos Aires FC, 1867. It was formed in 1867, and it was the first international club, which means it was formed outside of Europe in 1867 in Argentina. Now, Lausanne was in Switzerland and Buenos Aires FC was in Argentina, but they had a pretty strong connection to England or Britain because all the people who formed these clubs were not natives of either Switzerland or Argentina. They were English people who had migrated to these countries and heard about the development of the game and really wanted to play football too. So they came up with their own clubs. Moving on, FA Cup. As I told, FA was formed in 1862, and the first competition under the FA was the FA Cup. FA Cup is the oldest professional footballing competition in the world, and unlike other old footballing competitions, FA is still very much relevant. So even though it was founded in 1871, even today, teams can brag about winning the FA Cup. FA Cup, the beauty of FA Cup is anyone can win the FA Cup because all the top 8 tiers of English football compete in it, and we have had many upsets in the FA Cup over the years. This is the current symbol of the FA Cup. They have been sponsored by the Emirates now. The current champions of the FA Cup are a London-based club, which is called Arsenal. They beat Manchester City in the final. Now, the first international game, official international game, was held between Scotland and England in the year 1872. This was the first of many internationals which was played between between these two countries. In the 1870s, 80s, 90s, England and Scotland were the two powerhouses of football, international football, as well as domestic football. Scotland had many clubs coming up, so did England, and because of that emergence, they had the best players and the best teams. So they played against each other. However, the first international they ever played against each other, score was 0-0. Moving on, first international tournament was held in 1883. So there is a significant gap between the first international match and the first international tournament. The first international tournament was held between four countries, all of them being in Great Britain, which was with the countries were England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Scotland won the tournament by beating England in the final, and this was the first official tournament. There wasn't any prize or trophy given per se, but this was the first significant tournament which was held between two or more countries. Moving on, peaking of interest of sport. So as you can see, as I've said, starting from ancient times, and especially in the 1850s onwards, the interest of the sport has had reached a point which was not thought was possible before. In 1860s, interest had peaked and clubs started charging tickets for fans to come and watch them play. When they started charging tickets, they started generating revenue. So because of that revenue, they could pay the best players to come and play for their team, which in turn would mean the team doing well. So more fans would come in. So they used this money in two ways. First way was obviously bringing in players, as I said, and second was they used this money in building a stadium. So old-fashioned stadiums were very, very popular then. It's very popular now, and every club was not thought to have a stadium back then, but in the 1880s some clubs started having stadiums of their own, and that showed how big the club was. Industrialization also played a very big role in the peaking of interest of the sport, because industrialization led to emergence of teams, and people met to speak about their respective teams because they started meeting in public gathering places like pubs, churches, restaurants, etc. People also use the newly laid railroads to come to the city, big cities like London, Glasgow, to watch their best clubs and support them, which in turn again generated a lot of revenue for these clubs. Moving on, the Football League was formed in 1888. Football, any form of league, when you're talking about in football, it means over the course of a year or maybe less than a year, all the teams in the league play against each other twice, once in their stadium and once in the opponent stadium. And whoever has the most amount of points wins the trophy. Points being, if you win the game, you get 3 points. If you draw the game, you get 1 point, and if you lose, you get none. So nowadays it's based on points, but back in the 1880s, 1890s, and even early 1900s, it was based on the amount of wins. So the first footballing league was in England, which was in 1888, and only 12 teams participated. 12 teams participated, and whoever won were not given a trophy. They were just given a title like "You are the champion." That's it. Trophies came into the existence of football only in the 1900s. Back then, people had no idea of about trophies and all. Also, in this league, as I said, there was no trophies, but there was no relegation. Relegation means the consequence a team suffers when they finish last or like even second last. So nowadays, if you finish anywhere in the bottom three, you'll get relegated and you go to the second tier of football. And in second tier, whoever finishes first three usually comes up. So it's not the same teams every year. And every year there'll be new teams, or they might be the recurring teams, but it's very different. And nowadays, obviously, whoever finishes first are given a trophy or a cup to show the visual representation of what it is to win. Now, talking about the Scottish clubs, there were a lot of Scottish clubs formed in the 1880s and 1890s, and even before that. But there were two clubs from Scotland which were the most prominent. First being Celtic, and second one being Rangers. Both these clubs were absolute powerhouses in the club scene, because these both were very, they had the best players, they had the best stadium, they had the best fans, they had the best everything. Both these clubs are from Scotland, and also they are from the same city, which is Glasgow. uh, and whenever they played against each other, it was the biggest game in footballing history at that point of time, because they were from the same city. The fans were very passionate about each club. Like, you can't support both the clubs, or you can't even like both the clubs as an outsider. You need to pick one. And this was the first derby. A derby is a match when two teams from the same city play against each other. So this is the oldest known derby in the history of the sport, and it's called the Old Firm Derby. Even today, even though Celtic and Rangers are not the biggest clubs in the world anymore, but whenever they play against each other, it is absolute chaos. It is very intense, and the fans are very passionate about this derby even today. Moving on, since formation of FA, there has been many significant things in formations in football, but one of the most important things is formation of FIFA. FIFA is a governing body of football on the international stage. At that time, they also used to look into European football, but nowadays they don't really look into European football. They kind of look into the whole world of football, and they try governing the whole world instead of only Europe, because Europe is the most is currently Europe is the place where football is has the most money, has the most coverage. So FIFA looks at Europe, but they look at the rest of the world as well. This is the logo of FIFA. And in 1908, what FIFA managed to do is include football in the official Olympic Games. So in 1908, the Olympic Games were held in London, and it was the first Olympic Games in which football was a part of the events. And since then, football has been in the Olympic Games ever since. But today, nowadays, at that time, anyone could participate. But nowadays, usually only amateurs participate, and professionals usually stay out of the competition in order to give the amateurs a chance. Uruguay 1930. In Uruguay in the 1930 in the year 1930, the first World Cup was held by FIFA. It was held in the country of Uruguay because Uruguay had won gold in the 1928 Olympics, and FIFA felt like it was right to give Uruguay the choice to host the first ever World Cup. This is the flag of Uruguay. Uruguay is a country in South America. This competition was played only between 13 teams, and the first ever competition was played between 13 teams, and two of the main national teams in the world didn't participate in the first World Cup, that being England and Scotland. Both these teams were still going strong in the 1930s. They didn't participate because they felt insulted by FIFA, because they had come up with the game, they had evolved the game into a more playable manner, and they felt insulted because it wasn't even held in Europe or anywhere near the country. It was just given suddenly to Uruguay. So both these teams didn't participate in the World Cup until the year 1950, and the first World Cup was held in Uruguay, and also Uruguay won the World Cup. Uruguay won a 1930 World Cup by defeating Brazil in the final. Uruguay since 1930 have won only one more World Cup, which was in 1950, which means Uruguay didn't win a World Cup for the next 70 years, and it doesn't look likely that they will in the future. Moving on, European Cup. European Cup is a competition among clubs which is held in European Cup is a club competition which was started in 1954 by UEFA. Now, I have talked about FIFA, which controls the whole world's football. UEFA controls the football of in Europe because Europe has the most amount of national teams. It also has the most amount of financially backed clubs. So UEFA was formed in 1954, and within 1 year they had come up with the European Cup. European Cup is the premium was the premium club competition at that point, because there wasn't any other club competition which pitted, let's say, a club in England against a club in Germany. So they made a competition so that clubs in Spain could play against clubs in Italy, and clubs in France could play against some club in Belgium. So they came up with this European Cup in the 1955, and they, and since then, European Cup has been held every year. The most it does is not really called European Cup anymore. It goes by the name of UEFA Champions League now, uh, because European Cup kind of sounds outdated, so they had to come up with Champions League. The most successful team in Champions League is Real Madrid, who are from Spain. They have won the competition 13 times, and the current champions of the Champions League are Bayern Munich, who are a club from Germany, who have won the competition 6 times. They won their most recent Champions League during in this year 2020. They won it, beating PSG from France, and it was the sixth Champions League. There are also other two teams which have won the Champions League 6 times. That being Liverpool from England and AC Milan from Italy. I forgot to mention this, but in the World Cups, the most successful team of all time is Brazil, who have won the competition 5 times. The most recent being in the 2002 World Cup, where they beat Germany in the final. And the current champions of the World Cup are France, who won the competition in 2018. That's the second time they won the World Cup. First time being they won it in 1998. Moving on, nowadays we have UEFA Europa League. Now the Champions League is meant for the top clubs which play in Europe. But supposing some of the clubs in Champions League get knocked out of the Champions League because they are defeated by some other clubs, but they still want to win a European competition, so they can compete in the Europa League. Europa League is the second highly respected competition after the Champions League. Here, the current champions of Europa League are Sevilla from Spain. They have won the competition 5 times. And yeah, clubs can still participate in this even though they're not out of the Champions League. The last competition which from UEFA, which still occurs today, is the Euro. Euro is basically like a World Cup which happens only within the European countries. It doesn't have clubs, it has countries like England, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark. All those teams compete to win the Euro. Euro was first held in 1960, only 6 years after the formation of UEFA. And the most successful team in the Euro are Germany, Spain, who have won the competition 3 times each. The current champions are Portugal, who won the competition in 2016. So I've finished the evolution and also most of the European game. Now we'll talk about the modernization, how football became the modern game which we know today. First thing, as I already mentioned before, it's very different from rugby nowadays because of the sets of rule gardening it, which is you can't use hands. Only goalkeeper can use hands, but even goalkeeper can use hands only in his goal line. Outside that, he can't use. So it's not like rugby. You can't be as physical. Yeah. Moving on, popularity of individuals within a team. So in during the 18 late 1800s and also in early 1900s, teams were known across the world. Teams were known, but the players in the team didn't really matter because none of them outshone each other. All of them used to play as a unit, and no one really talked about an individual at that point. All of them talked about the team. So as I said, Celtic and Rangers were doing well, but no one in Celtic or Rangers was doing exceptionally well compared to the other player. So the popularity of individuals with the game was the first step towards modernization because of existence of people like Ferenc Puskás and Pele. Ferenc Puskás was a Hungarian footballer who obviously played for Hungary and also played for the Real Madrid team, two of the best teams in the late 1950s and early 1960s. So he was one of a kind, and he has been garnered the reputation of being one of the greatest footballers of all time, certainly one of the greatest European footballers of all time. And Pele really doesn't need any introduction. He stood out in a team of great Brazilian players in the 1958 World Cup, even when he was 17. He scored 3 goals in 2 matches, including one in the final and two in the semi-final, to win Brazil the World Cup when he was just 17. So he obviously went on to become one of the greatest players, and these two were the first examples of individuals standing out in a particular team. Then is the emergence of individual footballing awards. Now, to these individuals who stand out in a club or in a country, something different must be given to them because they have outperformed others and all. So, the two footballing awards which I can think of are the Ballon d'Or and the Puskás Award, which is named after the great Ferenc Puskás. Ballon d'Or is given to the player who has the best season in a year, as in he has the most consistency. His performance levels are really high. Uh, and his standards are very high. He has a great attitude towards the game. He respects the game. All that combined is given to the best player. So that is the Ballon d'Or. The current holder of Ballon d'Or is obviously Lionel Messi, who has won the Ballon d'Or 6 times. Moving on, for Puskás Award is given not to the best player, but to a player who has scored the best goal in the course of a season. So the best goal can be anyone. It can be from a guy in China scoring a goal, or it can be a guy in Germany in the top tier of German football scoring a good goal. Puskás Award is given to the best goal scorer, as in who has scored the most beautiful goal. Moving on, another part of modernization was the standardizing of length of pitch, size of goalposts, among other things. Now, pitch was decided to be on an even ground, and goalposts were not really existing back in the 1800s, but in the 1900s, goalposts existed. They didn't have a particular length or height. It was just that they need to be even on the both ends. So people at FIFA and UEFA standardized the length of the pitch and also the size of goalposts. The goalpost size is 24 feet by 8 feet, which means 8 feet is the height of the goalpost and 24 feet is the length between. 8 feet is the height and 24 feet is the length between the goalposts. That's why if you see the goalkeepers are really tall nowadays as compared to some other players on the pitch. Football length of a football pitch could be anything back in the day, but nowadays It is anywhere between 100 and 130 yards in length and 50 to 100 yards in breadth. And in specifically in Germany, it needs to be same for all the clubs, which is 105 by 86 meters. 86 being the breadth and 105 being the length. Next part of modernization was the creation of footballing kits. A football kit is the jersey and shorts which a player wears when he plays a game of football. Now, the football kit needs to be same over a course of a year, and when the season ends, the footballing kit usually changes. Creation of footballing kits, because some teams' kits stand out more than the other. For example, the yellow of Brazil is iconic at this point. The orange worn by the Netherlands men's national team is iconic, and the red worn by Manchester United is again iconic. So this creation of footballing kits usually occurred in the 1950s and 60s, and since then they have become iconic. Brazil started wearing their yellow kit in the 1950s, and even today they wear the yellow kit because it just resembles Brazil in a natural way. Same way Netherlands and Manchester United always have worn orange and red. Next is the emergence of nicknames for players and teams. This is not really got too much to do with modernization, but people felt a deep connection with any player or team. So they came up with nicknames which helped them in connecting with the club or players further. So some nicknames for some teams are like how Liverpool, they are a club which is called Liverpool, but they are called the Reds because they always wear red and their logo is also red. Now, Arsenal is another team in England which are called the Gunners because since their inception, their logo has always had a cannon. And Southampton is a lesser known club, but their nickname is called the Saints. They are called the Saints because even though opposition fans used to like during the course of a game used to whistle and used to boo them, they always used to keep their calm, have faith in their team, and they were very nicely behaved people. So throughout history, they've been called the Saints. Similarly, some other teams' nicknames are Netherlands because they always wear orange. They are called the Oranje, which means orange men in Dutch. And Manchester United, because they have always worn red, are called the Red Devils. Nicknames for some players are the best nickname I can think about is this player who used to play in the 1970s and 80s. He was a German defender. His name was Franz Beckenbauer, and he revolutionized his position, and he revolutionized that defenders can also come forward up the pitch and can score goals. Back then, defenders used to not score many goals. They used to just defend and used to give the ball away to midfielders and strikers. But he kind of came forward and scored a lot of goals. So he was called the Kaiser, which means the mastermind in German. Moving on, sponsorship for players and teams. This is, even though the word sponsorship might sound pretty modern, but sponsorships of players started in 1960s, like how Pele was sponsored by an American group, and how nowadays Lionel Messi is being sponsored by Adidas, and Cristiano Ronaldo is being sponsored by Nike. So all these sponsorships are for players and for teams as well. So sponsorship basically means that players can go around wearing their clothing, their items, and that will show off the brand, and people will get to know more about that. They also feel that, oh, so these athletes wear this and therefore might be performing in a higher level, even though they don't. It's not because of that, but people feel that way, and all the sports companies nowadays make a ton of money from sponsorships deals. Moving on, players and teams going abroad. This is not very ancient. This usually started in the 2000s, maybe late 2000s, but teams and players going abroad. This is not usually during the course of a season, they obviously go abroad when they play a European competition. Like if a club from England plays a club in from Italy, which means for the first match, the English team will have to go to Italy, and for the second game, the team from Italy will have to come to England. That also will give garner them a lot of attention from the media and from fans. But when a season ends, we and the players go to different countries. Like some teams go to North America, some teams come to Asia, some teams go to Australia. That is to show their players off, or show their club off, which will basically garner them attention in that part of the world where they are not very popular. So they usually do it before the season, which is called pre-season. Moving on, awards given to different teams for outstanding performance during a course of a season. So I had talked about Champions League, Europa League, and all that. Awards are the Champions League trophy, which has been given to the teams, the Europa League trophy, and so on. So if you give before in the 1800s, even though the players won an FA Cup, they were not given an award. They were just given a certificate telling that you have won this competition. So giving of awards kind of made it more competitive because players wanted to win these awards, and it caused a modernization of the game. Now, the first picture, if you see, that is Bayern Munich lifting their sixth Champions League title, which they won in the year 2020. And the second picture is Liverpool winning their Premier League, their first Premier League title in the year, again, 2020. So both these events happened this year. Moving on. Introduction of modern technologies like VAR and goal line technology. Now, as the game has moved forward, there has been a new rule in football which is called offside rule. The offside rule prevents the striker from just being in the other half and scoring a lot of goals like they used to do in the 1960s and 70s. Offside rule, and this VAR is video assistant referee, which is basically a referee who is sitting in a room with 6-7 different screens to see every angle of a decision that the referee on the footballing pitch has difficulty to deal with. The referee on the pitch obviously is human, he can make mistakes, so the introduction of VAR is to help the referee out. VAR has been introduced pretty recently. It was introduced in 2018 and used widely across Europe from the year 2019. However, VAR has not been used properly, in my opinion, because the referees nowadays use VAR to chop off the slimmest of goals, or what goal could have been given 5 years ago is not being given today because the distance and it's all very precise nowadays. So people say VAR is spoiling the spirit of the game, but anyway, moving on. Another technology which we use nowadays is goal line technology. Goal line technology is a very simple technology where the referee can simply look at his watch and decide that has the ball crossed over the goal line or has it not. Because nowadays players can, even the ball, if it's rolling slowly, a player can come and shoot the ball off from the line. So that will give you the accuracy that you need in order to determine whether the ball has completely crossed over the line or it's not. Now, as I've said before, football in ancient days used to be played as rugby. So obviously they had to reduce the physicality of the game, and they reduced it drastically. Nowadays you can't really, even before they used to say shoulder pushing was allowed. Nowadays even hard shoulder pushing is not really allowed, because if you shoulder push very hard and your opponent falls on their face and hurts their face, you'll be still given a foul and you can be shown a warning for that. So football has become less physical, and it is still very physically demanding, but it has become very less physical. And lastly, introduction of transfer market. Now, as I've said before, clubs started playing players to come and play for them. They didn't really have a good system for this back in the day, like since the 1800s, even 1900s, even in the till the 2000s, there was no good way of getting a new player to your club. It was just like you go to the player, you talk to him, and you give him money, and the player comes. So the team which the player previously used to play had no say in it. But nowadays, from the introduction of transfer market, which transfer market was introduced in the year 2002, and all the rules and regulations were laid down, and it became applicable across Europe from the year 2003. And yeah, so transfer market basically, existence of transfer market means both the clubs have to come together and negotiate a deal, and the both the clubs should be happy with the deal, including the player, including the staff of the both the clubs, including players of the both the clubs should be happy with the deal. Also, the agent of the footballer has to be happy, because nowadays no footballer has the time to go and negotiate a deal on their own. So 99% of all the footballers today have an agent who goes ahead and speaks with the club, with the two clubs, on the behalf of the player. Now I'm gonna show two formations of football which in which players can line up, and I'm just gonna briefly explain how the formations work. This is the first formation, which is called the 4-3-3 formation. It's called 4-3-3 because, as you can see, there are four defenders at the back, there are three midfielders in the middle, and there are three strikers up top. CB is center back, LBRB is left back and right back, DM is defensive midfielder, CAMs are center midfielder, LW and RW are left wing and right wing respectively, and CF is center forward. So this is one of the main formations which is used by clubs since 2010s, because Spain won the World Cup using this formation, and people found it very easy to explain teams in this formation. This is a very effective formation because your defense is pretty solid. You have four at the back. Your midfield is pretty compact, which will give the ball to the strikers, who will go ahead and scores the goal which you need to win the game. This is another formation which is called 3-5-2 formation. This formation is a little different from the 4-3-3 because there is a lot of space for the defenders. But this is, I would say, a more effective formation because you have three central defenders. Also, you have your LM and RM, which are left mid and right mid. They can obviously drop back a little bit to give you more defensive solidity. You also have your LDM and RDM, which is your left defensive midfielder and right defensive midfielder, to give you more compactness. CAM is a center attacking midfielder. This in the early 2000s existed more. Nowadays they have kind of, because all the teams have gone for a 4-3-3. This has led to kind of the decline of camps, and camps usually get the ball to the two strikers up top who form a partnership and score the goals which you need. As I said, most teams nowadays use the 4-3-3, and they have three midfielders, no defensive midfielders, but they're three box-to-box midfielders, which means they can play from anywhere between these two boxes, goalkeeping boxes, and yeah, they get their ball forward and let the strikers do their job. Some of the lessons from football we can use in our day-to-day life. There are a lot of lessons which we can't use, but I've picked out some lessons which we can. First lesson is teamwork. Now, even though I had talked about how individuals stand out in a particular team, it's not because of the only that individual that any team in the history of the game has won anything significant or done extremely well. The only exception to that, of course, is Diego Maradona in the 1986 World Cup. Obviously, I wasn't alive to see that World Cup, but from what I've heard and whatever highlights I've seen, is that Diego Maradona was the main player of the World Cup. He carried Argentina all the way to the final and actually won. He was known for dribbling the ball, taking the ball from his own goalpost and running to the opposition's goalpost before usually being fouled by the opponent, because that was the only way to stop him. No one could touch him. He was, as you know, Diego Maradona was pretty short, so it's really hard to grab him or foul him back then. Yeah, so that's the only exception. But otherwise, every time any team which has achieved anything in the history of football, it's all because of teamwork. You must have complementing skills. You can't have the same skill set as your teammates. You need to be a little different. You must complement each other, because you can't have a team of 11 goalkeepers, or you can't have a team of 11 defenders only. So you need to play off one another, because if you do that, that's when you'll have a successful team. And yeah, we can use teamwork in our everyday life also, because we need people around us to perform to our maximum capability. And also, when we work in a company, I would expect that to maintain good relations with people, have a good team spirit in order to do the best work possible. Moving on, fitness. Fitness, back in the day, fitness didn't really matter because anyone could play football. But nowadays, the footballing levels of fitness have gone to another level. I mean, you can just look at Cristiano Ronaldo, and when he was 19, or maybe when he was 20, 21, 22 even, he was very skinny. But after that, because he used to play in the Premier League, which is a very physically demanding league, he kind of built his body, and his body is even very physically fit now. He's 35 now, which might not be that old, but for a footballing from a footballing perspective, 35 is a very, very old man. But even then, at 35, he's going strong. He is very physically fit. And yeah, so this can, I mean, obviously, we need to maintain physical fitness in order to have a good work. I mean, have a good life, because physical fitness will not make us feel tired. It will not make us weak when we overwork. It will keep us going. Moving on, next is we have three essentials in football. Three essentials in football which we need are skill, stamina, and strength. In order to play football, you need decent amount of skill, you need good stamina, and you need strength. You need skill because if you don't have skill, you shouldn't be anywhere near the footballing pitch, because no matter what your ego says, if you don't have the skill set, you won't be able to do the job. Stamina, you need stamina to last the 90 minutes of the game. Football, as we know, is a game of 90 minutes, and after that, time is added on. If the footballing game doesn't end by 90 minutes, it can be extended up to 120 minutes, which is a lot more. And then finally, we need strength. Even though football, as I said, has become less physical, that doesn't mean the physicality has stopped existing. Football is still very physical, especially in football. Football in England is very, very physical. The Premier League has been called the most physical league, and people who have done a good job elsewhere, whenever they have come to Premier League, they have initially faced a lot of problems, including Ronaldo. When he came from Portugal, he was very skinny, and he was bullied by the defenders of the Premier League. Then obviously he developed his body and did that. We can connect this to our real life, because in order to do any job, we need a particular skill set. We need to be skillful in what we do. It may be Java, it might be Python, it might be C++, anything. We need the stamina, because sometimes we will have to overwork, and we will need the stamina to keep going. Strength is two things: physical strength and mental strength. Sometimes during the burden, when you take the burden of overworking or whatever, it obviously cause you need to have physical strength in order to keep going, but you need more than that, mental strength, because people usually take too much stress, they become overworked, and this might lead to depression and anxiety. So we must have good physical as well as mental strength. Strategy and planning. Strategy and planning doesn't have much to do with footballers in general, but back in the day, people used to not really care about strategies. They just thought we just go to the pitch and do our best. That's not strategy. Strategic planning usually came into football because of the great footballing legend, which is Johan Cruyff. He was a Dutch footballing legend who had introduced the the concept of total football. Total football means anyone can play any position. Defender can come forward, score goals. Striker can drop back and try defending. Midfielders can take the ball from their pitch up till the opponent's pitch. Even the goalkeeper can come out and clear the ball if he wants to. So that was total football, and that was the first planning strategy, whatever, in the history of the game. No one had ever thought about that before. It's called total football, and we need this. We need strategy and planning in our lives, not only to lead our lives. We must have a strategy of how the day will go, how we want the day to go. We must plan out our day. Not only that, but we need to plan out our careers as well. If you don't have a certain goal in your mind, you won't know what to do. And even though you're successful, you won't be content with yourself. You might be thinking, I don't know what I want. So we must have a strategy. We must have a particular goal in mind, and we must have a way to get to the goal. Then is preparation and practice. This is one of the most essential components in football. See, even though if you ask people about Messi and Ronaldo, if you ask them who is the more gifted footballer, they will say Messi. But if you say who is the most hardworking footballer, they'll say Ronaldo. If you ask people, they'll usually be like, Messi was born a genius, but Ronaldo is been made like this. I don't think that's true. I don't think anyone's born a genius. It's about what you develop. And I'm not saying I don't believe that Messi is more gifted than anyone else, and anyone else is less gifted than Messi. But both of them did their hard works. Both of them have done enormous amount of practice. It's just that it feels like Ronaldo has done more because you can see the change in his body, like how his physicality changed, how his full attitude towards the game changed. So we need preparation and practice again in our life, because once we have a certain goal, we know how to get to the goal. But if we don't prepare and don't practice, we are gonna come across road bumps all the way to our goal, and we won't be able to reach our goal in the end. Yeah. So, and the last point is unity. Now, you might be wondering that unity and teamwork both are same, which you might be right. But teamwork, when I was talking about teamwork, I was talking within a game. Unity, I'm talking about us fans as well. Fans, all the people who work for the club, they are all unified in order to support a particular club, and support football as a whole. So unity also, as in when you support a club, like how I support Liverpool, you don't only support the team because of the financial backing. You don't only support the team because their dress looks nice or they're doing good, so you support them. You support the team because you like football. First of all, you support the team because you have a connection with the team. You support the team because you have a connection with the city. Like personally, for me, I support Liverpool, which is from the city of Liverpool. I love the city. And some people start supporting these clubs based on form, as in if this club does good, they support this club. If another club does good, they support another club. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to stick to one club. Like I have been a Liverpool fan pretty recently, but I had still not expected us to do so good as we have done in the past few years. And yeah. Yeah, and you need to be a fan from starting till the end, and it doesn't matter how bad your team is doing. Like recently, Liverpool lost a game 7-2. We lost by 7 goals to 2. And even then, I was very disappointed, but I didn't give up on my team. I kept believing, and we didn't really do much after that, but still, I still have this belief that we are going to do good. Also about unity, I'd like to share a small story. This happened during the Second World War, and it happened when Germany was against Britain, and it was the eve of Christmas, and both the soldiers were resting. The German soldiers suddenly saw that English soldiers are coming, so they drew their weapons. And the German general was like, "No, please don't draw your weapons," and because the English soldiers which were coming were not having guns in their arms. So They obviously kept down their guns and they asked what was this about. So they said, we have bought you food, because food and clothes and whatever else we have a little bit, because it's the eve of Christmas and Christmas brings everyone together. So they chatted all night. Even though the next day they had to go to battle, they chatted the night, they drank together, and at the end of the day they played a little football match of their own. So Germany won that game, but as they do nowadays also. But that didn't really matter, because that day football won, and it showed the world how powerful football is, and finally what the game is all about. The game is all about unity, and it's not about winning or losing. Thank you. Yeah, that's my presentation.